Gary Oldman, a man who wouldn't know a silent night if it hit him in the face with a stocking full of coal, was having himself a very merry Christmas Eve. Well, merry might be pushing it. More like methamphetamine-fueled. See, Gary wasn't hanging tinsel or kissing carolers. He was a burglar, and business was booming. The festive season had its perks, Gary had found. People were so busy with their Christmas cheer they forgot to lock their doors. And Gary, dressed head to toe in black despite the December chill, looked vaguely Santa-shaped in the dark. More than once, he'd been wished a happy Christmas as he scarpered with a telly. Irony, Gary thought, was the best Christmas spice. He'd even perfected a Father Christmas chuckle for when he found a particularly good stash of cash. Ho, 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 he'd rasp, the sound more likely to summon Krampus than fill a child with joy. Tonight, Gary was on a roll. His sack, far from filled with gifts, bulged with pilfered PlayStations and enough jewelry to make Mr. T jealous. His last stop, a house with scaffolding up, seemed promising. One last score for the night, he muttered, already picturing the little rocks of crack cocaine dancing in his head. The air was crisp, the only sound the distant drone of Christmas carols. He just knew this was going to be a very profitable Christmas. Gary's life wasn't all sugar plums and reindeer rides. In fact, it was more like stale mince pies and a drunken brawl at the office party. He lived for the next hit, the rush that briefly blotted out the bleakness of his existence. Christmas was just another opportunity to score. He'd case a joint, slip in while families were distracted by bad cracker jokes and lukewarm turkey, and help himself to their valuables. It was surprisingly easy. People were so busy performing holiday cheer they forgot to be wary. The loot was always immediately converted to cash, then crack. He'd spend his Christmas Eve in a haze, the blinking lights of the neighborhood merging with the hallucinations brought on by the drugs. It wasn't pretty, but it was his normal. This year, though, he'd outdone himself. The haul from tonight's escapades was substantial. He could practically taste the chemical euphoria. A twisted Christmas present to himself. One last house, then he'd be off to see his dealer, a man who went by Sparky, a cruel joke considering his line of work. The scaffolding was a piece of cake for a seasoned pro like Gary. He scaled it with the agility of a man half his age, fueled by greed and a fair bit of brandy. He jimmied the window open, humming jingle bells under his breath, completely oblivious to the chaos that awaited him. The house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. But Gary, blinded by the promise of a white Christmas, and by white Christmas he meant crack cocaine, didn't notice. He crept through the shadows, his hand already reaching for a vase that looked older than he was. Suddenly a low growl cut through the silence. Gary froze. Two eyes, glowing like malevolent Christmas ornaments, appeared in the darkness. Before he could react, a small, furry missile launched itself at him, teeth bared. It was a poodle, but not the fluffy, yappy kind. This one looked like it had just escaped a heavy metal concert, all snarls and snapping jaws.
Bloody hell!
Gary yelped, stumbling back in surprise. He hadn't factored aggressive canines into his Christmas Eve heist. As the poodle, which a conveniently placed dog bowl identified as Tilly, continued its assault, a new horror emerged from the shadows. Section 4, A Christmas Carol. It wasn't Santa Claus, it was, if anything, even more terrifying. A massive, fluffy ragdoll cat, its blue eyes like chips of ice, stalked towards him. This was no Garfield, all lasagna and naps. This cat, Peter, according to a nearby embroidered cushion, moved with a predatory grace that sent shivers down Gary's spine. Trapped between Tilly's ferocious nipping and Peter's silent menace, Gary did the only sensible thing. He screamed like a choir boy who'd found coal in his stocking. His cries echoed through the empty house, a jarring counterpoint to the cheerful Christmas music drifting in from the street. Tilly, perhaps mistaking Gary's terror for a festive game, went for his ankles, her sharp teeth tearing through his trousers. Peter, meanwhile, had taken to batting at Gary's legs with surprising strength, claws extended. Gary, his dreams of a crack-fueled Christmas fading faster than the battery life on a singing Santa, finally managed to scramble back towards the window. He tumbled out onto the scaffolding, landing in an undignified heap. Tilly, thwarted, barked in triumph from the window. Peter sat serenely on the sill, watching Gary's plight with detached amusement. Section 5, Silent Night, Deadly Night. Gary lay there for a moment, catching his breath and assessing the damage. He was bruised, bloodied, and his pride was more dented than a Christmas ornament after a run-in with a toddler. As he limped away, he could hear Tilly and Peter still celebrating their victory, their sounds a discordant carol in the night.
Those bloody cats and dogs are all right, I tell you. Heard a right racket next door. Sounded like old Nick himself was getting a good seeing to.
Meanwhile, in the warm glow of a nearby house, a burly builder named Sam took a long drag from his post-work spliff. He chuckled to his equally stoned mate.
Someone's having a worse Christmas than me.
Across town, Manoj, glued to the telly, barely looked up from the Christmas special of the chase. He muttered, shoveling another mince pie into his mouth as the chaser caught another hapless contestant. And in the sterile quiet of the local hospital, a lone figure sobbed. It was Gary, his Christmas Eve haul long gone, nursing his wounds and a broken crack pipe.
Merry bloody Christmas,
he croaked, the words heavy with irony. As the painkillers slowly kicked in, he couldn't help but think, maybe those Christmas carolers had a point after all. Maybe peace on earth wasn't such a bad idea. Then he drifted off to sleep and dreamt of fluffy white cats with eyes like ice and poodles with a taste for burglar blood.